Welcome, everyone. This is an AG Fall Meeting workshop on adapting community science for international operations. We're pleased that you're joining us for this 90-minute session. As a prelude to the session, enjoy this brief video about AGU's Thriving Earth Exchange.
The Thriving Earth Exchange is a program where we partner with communities that need help with resilience, disaster reduction, or sustainability.
We match them with a volunteer scientist. We help those scientists' community teams work together, and then we try to find a way for science to help them address those priorities. And then we share the results so other people can benefit from the things they've discovered together.
The Thriving Earth Exchange started, just like everything, with a good idea.
It started in an advisory board meeting when people were thinking about what they could do to celebrate the past 100 years and really set the stage for the next 100 years. And the way we thought about doing that was partnering with people in the places they live, work, and play to do work that's locally meaningful.
So in terms of positive impacts, we've seen many of those.
In Denver, local community group was interested in how the environment was impacting their health. And they started doing some sampling in people's homes and realized that especially poorer residents were being exposed to radon. And the city ended up instituting a new program that helps low-income homeowners remediate radon from their homes.
Well, in 5 to 6 years, we've been able to benefit 100 communities, but our ultimate vision is that any community that can benefit from scientific expertise has the ability to access that expertise that they need.
This is a way of doing science in communities with people. By doing science with people, we get to explore new approaches to science, and that's going to help us evolve and innovate and stay relevant into the future.
In this workshop, we will provide you with an introduction and overview of AGU's Thriving Earth Exchange, and also an overview of the concept of community science and Thriving Earth Exchange's community science process, Thriving Earth Exchange's international strategy, brief overviews from our partners in Australia, Mongolia, and Senegal as to how and why they've sought and adapted community science, as well as opportunities, challenges, and some tips for how to adapt community science in your country. We will end with a live question and answer period following those talks. I'm pleased to introduce you to my counterparts who are on the cutting edge of adapting Thriving Earth Exchange's community science approach. Mr. Doro Niang, a geoscientist and president of the Association of Young Geologists and Environmentalists of Senegal. Ms. Arayuna Norov-Sambu, a board member for Public Lab Mongolia. And Ms. Eleanor Robson, Research and Policy Officer with Future Earth Australia. I am Natasha Urugama, Program Manager for International and Community Engagement with AGU's Thriving Earth Exchange. Since you are participating in this year's fall meeting, there's no reason to tell you about AGU. What's important to know is that AGU's mission is to support and inspire a global community of individuals and organizations interested in advancing discovery in earth and space sciences and its benefit for humanity and the environment. As part of AGU, Thriving Earth Exchange's mission closely aligns with our parent organization in that Thriving Earth Exchange strengthens and enhances collaboration among communities, scientists, and partner organizations so that all communities can build healthy, resilient, thriving, just, and ecologically responsible futures. Our vision at Thriving Earth Exchange is to be a leader in contributing to global well-being by supporting communities' awareness and application of science, and promoting equity by ensuring that all communities benefit from the opportunity to participate in, contribute to, and guide the use of scientific knowledge. Community science is part of several traditions of community engagement, including many of the terms listed here. Our approach is probably most closely aligned with co-created science, co-production, and extreme citizen science. However, many of the elements of the approaches listed have greatly influenced our approach to community science. Thriving Earth Exchange defines community science as the process by which communities and scientists do science together to advance one or more community priorities. These are often priorities related to geosciences, environmental health, sustainability, and pollution, generally falling into categories of climate change, natural hazards, and natural resources. It encourages communities, particularly historically marginalized and oppressed communities, to guide, participate in, learn from, and benefit from science. In the last 7 years, Thriving Earth Exchange has developed its own brand of community science. Our process is a 3-phase process to get a community priority from an idea to an impactful solution or tool for that community. In the first phase, scope, an organization's project manager, along with a community leader, confer with each other in a series of conversations to better understand the community priority and develop a project description that also serves as a scientist wanted ad. It's all about turning a community idea into an actionable project that can incorporate science. Once a project manager and a community leader are happy with the project description, the project moves into the match phase. This is when the project description, or the scientist wanted ad, is used to find the appropriate scientific candidates to join the team. Here, the project manager would do outreach, interviews, get references, and then recommend the best scientific candidates for the project. Once community leaders and community scientists are happy to work with one another, the project officially moves into the solve phase. Here, community leaders and community scientists, with guidance from their project manager, work together to develop a project plan, communications protocol, and do a project that typically lasts anywhere between 6 and 18 months. Project managers help to ensure the team stays on track by checking in every month, as well as doing any facilitating, mentoring, and coaching of individuals and the team as necessary. Through it all, sharing occurs. One of Thriving Earth's core tenets is that, as much as possible, every community science project keep track of processes, methodologies, outcomes, solutions, and tools so that other communities with similar issues might be able to adapt and potentially replicate those projects with their communities. The project manager, with assistance from the team, helps to share the highlights, milestones, results, and outcomes throughout all phases of the community science project. Thriving Earth Exchange has done over 140 projects in the United States, as well as outside of the United States. In the early years, starting around 2015, Thriving Earth managed international projects directly from our headquarters in Washington, D.C., just as we had done with domestic projects. While we did about 10 projects internationally in this manner, we rapidly learned that this method of remote managing was inefficient and did not acknowledge the overarching importance of cultural and contextual knowledge inherent in someone from those countries managing their own locally based community science projects. Therefore, our current international strategy involves seeking out organizations and community-based organizations based outside of the United States with the commitment, time, and personnel resources to do community science by adopting Thriving Earth's approach to community science. That way, those organizations can work with the communities and scientists within their regions and countries. Thriving Earth is willing to partner with organizations that have the commitment, time, personnel, and institutional resources to develop such a community science hub. These organizations should be willing to fully commit to doing community science, including dedicating staff time and other necessary resources to recruit and train communities, scientists, design and manage individual projects to completion, and collect and share results. They should also be willing to manage community science projects within their region or country, to hire or set aside time for staff to partner with Thriving Earth Exchange so as to adapt our community science practices or processes for their region and country, to provide insight into their own practices and actively seek guidance and training from Thriving Earth Exchange, to pilot a small number of community science projects, to work independently to build capacity for their organization to do more community science, to actively provide best practices and seek guidance and training from Thriving Earth Exchange. In turn, Thriving Earth Exchange will provide these organizations with training and mentoring on Thriving Earth Exchange's approach to community science, infrastructure to track projects, publicity for the projects, and support on proposals. Thank you so much for your attention. If you're interested in learning more about how to develop your own community science hub or have any further questions, please email me or stay on the line for our live question and answer period following the talks from our partners from Australia, Mongolia, and Senegal. With that, I'll turn it over to Thriving Earth Exchange partner, Future Earth Australia.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to listen to our talk about community science being applied across the globe. My name is Eleanor Robson, and I'm a Research and Policy Officer at Future Earth Australia, which is based at the Australian Academy of Science. I've been project manager within our partnership with AGU's Thriving Earth Exchange, and it's my pleasure to talk to you today briefly about the opportunities associated with their community science model, and adapting that model to our context. So first of all, I would like to take a moment just to introduce Future Earth Australia. We are a national initiative which convenes people working in sustainability across sectors, knowledge sets and backgrounds to advance the sustainable development goals as a priority for national governance, investment and research. Future Earth Australia is one of the national nodes as part of the International Future Earth Network, which is comprised of thousands of researchers and practitioners working on the global challenges that will define sustainability. We believe that defining sustainability issues of our time require a collaborative approach in which people can work together from national to local scale. So while a major part of our work consists of things like national policy development and capacity building, it also involves using our networks and project management expertise to connect communities and researchers in areas that they can assist one another in. Across our huge continent, local stewardship of the environment and community wellbeing has been led by community organisations and leaders for many, many years. So stewardship of the majority of our landscape has actually rarely been centralised. First Nations people stewarded the landscape for tens of thousands of years prior to colonisation, and since then, community-led models have continued to be very important within governance of our environment. So for example, the Australian Landcare program has been replicated around the world as a means of engaging and empowering farmers and communities to lead conservation outcomes. Adopting and extending the Thriving Earth Exchange model is an important part of contributing to the ongoing development of these approaches. At a local level, forging strong working partnerships between communities and researchers on a shared priority means that local people have ownership of the solutions which they trust are informed by the best information available. Researchers see their skills improve the world in tangible ways. And at national level, high-level conceptual policy areas can be grounded by practical collaborations. So issues like climate adaptation and social resilience in the wake of ongoing disasters are made more tangible by the partnerships defined by those living the experience. Connecting work from local, regional and national scale helps us to more accurately grasp the kinds of imperatives that we have for sustainability policy and practice. In framing our community science initiative around sustainability issues, we have found that there are a lot of opportunities to incorporate the community's character and their spirit into what can sometimes be relatively technical projects. We let communities define sustainability their way, but encouraged applications which incorporated social, economic, environmental and cultural elements. Both of the communities that we selected to undertake a project within our first cohort are dealing with adapting to more frequent and intense bushfire seasons from a community perspective. One in the west of Australia is looking at how community perspectives, priorities and knowledge can meaningfully guide local bushfire management, while another in southeastern Australia is seeking professional assistance with building a community garden as a place for their community to gather and share and build social resilience and connections following their bushfire and drought season last year, which was devastating. So when we formed our partnership with Thriving Earth Exchange, we had not expected to be launching our first cohort in the midst of a pandemic. Communities, researchers and practitioners, however, are just as passionate as they have ever been to find evidence-based solutions to their priorities. And we've just been forced to design projects a little more shrewdly to take these kinds of restrictions into account. So, for example, instead of a researcher doing the soil sampling themselves, they will now be teaching community members remotely, likely school students, how to do it, which is actually even better as a community outcome. And I'd like to kind of take a quick second to give a shout out to the researchers and the communities who are part of our first cohort, because the COVID pandemic has been very financially difficult for a lot of those involved, and they've still managed to find a little bit of extra time and extra money and ability to engage with this because they believe it to be a really worthwhile project to do. So I suppose to touch on a greater complexity involved with working in community science in our context in Australia is the need to be really strategic and sensitive about the politics within communities around these kinds of issues. So in Australia, environment and climate can be really difficult subjects, particularly when environmental protection involves discussion about how private property is used, economic change and its implications for community well-being. There's kind of a distinct cultural difference between people who come from these established formal institutions, oftentimes in urban areas, coming and telling a community what they should or should not do about their issues, which they might not have any practical knowledge of. So this is something that we've had to be very, very cognizant of and careful and respectful of when we're dealing with communities who are particularly living in regional areas in Australia. The Thriving Earth model has actually been very well designed in this regard. It positions communities as the central driver from the outset of the priorities of the project. But I suppose as an aside, time and care has to always be taken to avoid overstepping your role as a coordinator of partnerships. Secondly, community science is pretty well established in Australia as a mode of working, but we often lack opportunities to share and connect knowledge and expertise between communities. So this means that the golden know-how that's been designed, tested, and progressed at local level doesn't have a place to feed into where others can share, listen, and learn. So Future Earth Australia is leading a hosting consortium for the Sustainability Research and Innovation 2021 Congress, which is taking place both in Brisbane in Australia and also online. And part of the motivation for hosting this Congress is to create a place for people to share information and knowledge across sectors, disciplines, and local communities. So, community science has been around for a while in different iterations over time, AGU's model is a fantastic contribution to mainstreaming this kind of work as core business for knowledge institutions. So for the purpose of putting it into action, we found that it's always really good practice to do some homework into past experiences of community science, community-led natural resource management, and local governance. Even in areas that are not strictly to do with environment or science, for example, public health and integrated health services in Australia are leading the way in terms of collaborative practice. They have a lot of good things to teach us for, applying the community science type model. So I would suggest that a really good place to start if you're thinking of adapting this model for your context is to look at, the history of how other people have done this in the past and couch it in that context. In a similar vein, I think it's always good to think laterally about who can help you with whatever task you have at hand. So publicising opportunities for communities or researchers, scientists and practitioners to get involved is usually a really easy ask of things like peak bodies and industry and community associations, for example, because sustainability and environment and science are increasingly considered to be integral to community wellbeing, and they'll likely have an interest in these kinds of initiatives. So that's all from me. I hope that you've enjoyed this brief kind of overview of what we have done so far in adapting AGU's Thriving Earth Exchange model to the Australian context. Please feel free to get in touch with me at any time. I will now turn the presentation over to Thriving Earth Exchange partners from Public Lab Mongolia. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Ari. I'm the board member of Public Lab Mongolia, and it is a great pleasure to join today's session. On behalf of the PLM team, I will be presenting briefly about the challenges and opportunities of adapting community science in Mongolia. Okay, let us start with the slides now. Well, we wanted to start with a brief introduction about PLM. PLM stands for Public Lab Mongolia. It is a fairly young organization established in 2018. Now the team consists of young professionals interested and passionate about environmental issues, community development, and mapping. Our mission is to cultivate a healthy environment and resilient communities through open data. And we believe in the importance of open, transparent, easy to access data. And we believe that by helping and educating communities to access this data would help them enormously in resolving environmental and public health challenges that communities face. Briefly about existing PLM programs, not very many, but all are very interesting and important for the future development of this organization. So let me start with these, with the Air Quality Inquiry Program. It's an important initiative for us. The idea behind the AQIQ program is to empower communities, educate them about air pollution issues, especially in the capital city of Mongolia, and put modern air quality monitoring technologies called pods into the hands of university and high school students and community scientists to investigate air quality questions in their hometown. Another interesting initiative, so-called Mapathon. We're part of the humanitarian open street mapping team, and therefore we organize mapathons with youth to populate open source mapping data. And this is important because we mostly work with university students, youth basically, and through mapathons we help them to become part of the Mappers Network, which consists of mostly volunteers who contribute their time and effort to cultivate the culture of open data in Mongolia. Now the plan is to have community science projects also is one of our core programs at PLM. To be honest with, well, we haven't really accomplished a lot yet, but we already started this journey to learn about community science. Back in 2019, we came across with an opportunity to participate in an exchange program for young environment professionals. The program allowed us to spend an incredibly engaging and interesting 2 weeks in the US, where we had the opportunity to meet with environmentalist scientists and community leaders. And this is when we had the chance to meet with Natasha, Raj, and others at the Thriving Earth Exchange for the first time. And we got extremely interested in the approach and methodology that the Thriving Earth Exchange team presented to us. And for information, only actually a few weeks ago, we completed the online course on community mapping, on community science that Natasha and her team kindly put together for us. So all of us in our team were extremely grateful for this opportunity provided. And well, this is briefly about the core programs that we have at PLM. And in next slides, I will start sharing more about our reflections on community science, challenges and opportunities for community science in Mongolia. But before we go into community science discussions, we wanted to give you a brief information about Mongolia. Well, we're a small nation of only 3.2 million. However, we're the world's 18th largest country with 1.5 million square kilometers of land. As you can imagine, we're one of the least populated countries in the world. Out of 3.2 million, almost half of it, which is approximately 1.4 million, lives in the capital city. And we're a landlocked country sandwiched between Russia and China. Approximately 30% of the population is nomadic or semi-nomadic. Horse culture is still very integral. We're believed to be one of the most democratic countries in the region. We have a parliamentary system. Every 4 years, we have parliamentary elections. Economic activity in Mongolia has long been based on herding and agriculture, although development of extensive mining has emerged as a driver of industrial production in recent decades. Mongolia is ranked as lower middle income economy by the World Bank. Approximately 20% of the population lives on less than $1 a day. According to recent estimations, the GDP per capita is around $4,200. Some of the pressing issues, well, urbanization, air pollution, mining-related environmental degradation, public health problems, climate change, poor governance, corruption, transparency issues, and economic sustainability issues. Now, why community science is interesting and relevant to Mongolia? There is increasing disconnect between scientists and the community. Lack of collaboration, practical collaboration between scientists and the communities. And I think this is a problem not just in Mongolia only, but in many countries around the world. The general public lacks scientific literacy. They are not used or trained to use science in decision making. A large portion of the public doesn't believe, or they just simply don't understand how to apply science in resolving the pressing issues they face. Also, scientists many times focus on theoretical things, and they sometimes don't have answers to practical problems, whereas the society always needs more practical solutions to problems. And we think that increased interaction between the scientists and the community through community science projects would be important to educate the general public in understanding the importance in the use of science in decision-making. We believe that there is need to build strong, resilient communities in the face of climate change and environmental degradation. Mongolia is not a major contributor to climate change. However, we're highly impacted by the negative consequences of climate change, especially the nomadic communities. We see increasing desertification, land degradation, glaciers are melting, rivers and lakes are shrinking. We experience more severe winters. The amount and the pattern of rainfalls have changed. So there's increasing need to support the nomadic communities to build more stronger and resilient communities in the face of climate change. There is need to move away from development mentality based on direct aid. For the last 30 years, Mongolia has been highly dependent on direct aid programs from overseas. Of course, direct aid programs across the broad spectrum of economic and social sectors help to boost the development, reduce poverty, and promote education in many ways. However, it also created a society highly dependent on aid programs. And there's increasing discussion, especially amongst youth, about the need to move away from this development mentality based on direct aid and become the problem solvers, the drivers of change. And we do hope that community science projects can trigger the communities to look at problems from the perspective of a problem solver and empower them to become the change makers. Community science approach in development is not in practice, despite heavy rhetoric on participatory governance. Well, as we understand, participatory governance seeks to deepen citizen participation in decision-making processes. And the Mongolian government has issued a significant number of laws, regulations in support of participatory planning and budgeting processes. However, there are still lots of flaws in practical implementation of these laws and regulations, and the citizens are still not well equipped with tools to better participate and raise their voices when needed. And hopefully tools and approaches such as community science can demonstrate in practice how citizens can effectively participate and contribute to resolving pressing problems. We also believe that there is need to encourage more women and women participation in community and environmental initiatives. Even though there are different levels of citizen participation due to gender biases, we believe that in many communities across the country, women can become the leaders to represent the communities. And especially the role of women herders is very important in combating climate change in Mongolia, as they are the ones who are disproportionately impacted by climate change. Women face unequal access to funds to cover climate change related losses or adaptation technologies. They face gender-based barriers preventing them from accessing land, financial services, or social capital. We hope that encouraging women participation in decision-making through community science projects will result in greater responsiveness to citizens' needs and increased cooperation among the community groups. Now, briefly about the opportunities. One thing we like the most about community science projects is that these can be very solution oriented, and therefore it would be easier to get local support. Local communities would always welcome new initiatives that focus on tangible outcomes. And as mentioned earlier, local communities are more aware of environmental and public health issues exacerbated by rapid urbanization and climate change. And therefore, we believe that it would be easier to get buy-in for environmental and solutions focused projects. Mongolia has a fairly young population. So once we start community science projects, there's a possibility for us to engage and mobilize youth, since they would be more responsive and interested in adopting new tools and methodologies. And we hope that it would be possible to replicate good practices to other communities with similar challenges. We see also interest from young scientists to collaborate on community science projects. The generation of younger scientists is totally different than the socialist educated generation of scientists. They embrace the challenges, they seek new ways of making science more practical and useful, and they are flexible in terms of time and commitment. So we believe that we have the momentum here to engage young scientists in community science projects. As for challenges, we'll list a couple of them below, which might trigger some discussion afterwards, especially during the Q&A session. Culture of open data is still immature in Mongolia. Some data is available to, some data is not available to public at all. Some data is available, however, you would have to go through numerous bureaucratic steps to access the data. Also, some data is never easy to comprehend or use, as they are provided in formats which are not reader or user-friendly. And there is limited capacity of local communities in developing countries, especially in terms of accessing accurate information, voicing their needs and concerns to government officials, initiating and implementing long-term self-sustaining projects. In some instances, keeping community regularly engaged is difficult without certain incentives, especially in poor communities where people constantly struggle for food for their families. So it will be important for the project team to be sensitive about the community needs and concerns, and to clearly articulate the goals and outcomes of projects so that community sees tangible benefits to them, to their families in being part of it. Administrative processes in Mongolia can be political or highly nepotism based. Mongolians live in a 4-year election cycle, basically. So there's high turnover whenever there's a change of the ruling party after elections. And it affects negatively the social welfare system. It hinders the efficient delivery of public services to citizens. It increases corruption and nepotism. And it's always important to be aware of these changes whenever you start a new project or new initiative, especially if you want to influence the decision-making processes. Not many can afford to volunteer their time, even for skill building and work experience. The reality is that many professional scientists in Mongolia, they are working in government agencies with low salary, with small benefits, and the government spending on R&D has historically been very, very small. And even university students prefer working service jobs over unpaid internships so that they could pay their tuition fees. Another thing to mention here is a local NGO, we're quite limited by our financial resources. Working with communities, especially the rural communities, would require extensive travel and effort to maintain the communication and upkeep the commitment. It requires the project team to be innovative and become an active fundraiser to cover at least the most essential costs whenever new projects emerge. The last slide we have here contains some tips for adapting community science in Mongolia. As we mentioned earlier, communities should learn and understand the importance of science, database decision-making. For communities to become more active and empowered, we believe that continuous capacity building of local communities through regular interactions is important. Also, sharing examples of successful community science projects to incentivize and empower communities would be important, especially in recruiting new communities and establishing efficient collaboration with them. Furthermore, seeking opportunities to bring community science project results to decision-making policy level would be highly important to ensure the sustainability of such projects and also demonstrate the benefits that community science projects can bring to the society. Engaging young scientists approaching academic institutions for support and collaboration would be important to cultivate more effective collaboration between the scientific community and the general public, and to raise awareness and gain support amongst the younger generation of scientists. And lastly, it would be extremely useful to leverage some support to fundraise to successfully launch and implement community science projects in Mongolia. So I'm going to stop here, and I hope the presentation, the information provided was useful and interesting for you all. I personally will not be able to join the Q&A session, so apologies beforehand. My colleague Tunga will participate in the Q&A session, and I'm sure she will be happy to answer the questions that you would have during the session. So goodbye, and thank you very much for listening. We all look forward to continued collaboration with AGU, with Thriving Earth Exchange, to successfully adapt the community science approach in Mongolia. And now I will turn it over to Thriving Earth Exchange partners from the Association of Young Geologists and Environmentalists of Senegal.
Is Doro Niang. I'm an environmental geologist and geotechnician. I'm also the president of Association of Young Geologists and Environmentalists of Senegal. It's a real pleasure to participate in this panel, Adapting Community Science for International Operations. Community Science in Senegal, West Africa. The AGS in an organization bringing together young geologists, hydrogeologists, geotechnicians, environmentalists from, in a general way, different training institutions of earth science, environment, and geoscience of Senegal. Our vision: to develop a synergy of actions between members based on ethics, integrity, equity, and civic commitments to boost the sustainable development of our beloved country and the African continent. Our objective is first to promote the initiative of young geologists and environmentalists in Senegal, participate fully in the national constructions effort through the development of the mining, oil, and construction sector, and the protection of the environment. Promote sustainable development through the management of natural resources, the promotion of renewable energies, established fruitful partnership with different government structures, the private sector, mining companies, NGOs in Senegal and abroad. Strengthen skills like training, symposia, conference, workshop, seminar, as a means of improving the employability of young geologists and environmentalists. We have doing many activities like promoting earth and space sciences in high school, in partnership with AGU. Have together the community service like Greening Africa Together, promote biogas CO2 compensations in Casamance, south end of Senegal. Another community services in eastern Senegal, like this panel to fight climate change, reforesting, and promote local materials for building smart city. Have many opportunities for community science in Senegal and in Africa. First, the opportunities available to Senegal in terms of community science development are enormous. In terms of supporting populations in the implementation of local priorities, including the fight against climate change, inequality, capacity building needs, and projects that bring about change. Community science provides opportunities for AGS to understand local priorities, particularly those related to climate, environment, agriculture, valorization of local materials like promotion, smart and green cities, and promotes geoscience also. Have also many challenges of community science in Senegal and Africa, like helping community leaders understand that their knowledge and input is important and necessary for helping scientists develop feasible tools and solutions that is promoting equity, ensuring that all who should be included in the process of doing community science are included, equity and inclusion. Also, we have understanding and supporting community prioritization, encouraging and accompanying the decision-making process of the community within the framework of the improvement of their living conditions. We have and also tips for adapting community science in Africa. First, have educate organizational members and communities in the concept of community science. To have some experience of working with community so as to demonstrate trust and be able to introduce the concept of community science. Identify the realities of the ground in terms of community functioning to better adapt the concept of community science in order to achieve the objective set as to achieve. Putting communities at the heart of the adapting strategy of community-based science in Africa by valorizing community-based knowledge and practice in terms of sustainable development at the local level. We will now open up to a live question and answer period. Thank you for your attention and we look forward to your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for joining us today. Again, my name is Natasha Udugama with AGU's Thriving Earth Exchange. Because of the extreme time difference between the US West Coast and Brisbane, my colleague from Future Earth Australia, Eleanor Robson, will not be joining today's question and answer period. And Tunga Chulumbatar, co-founder of Public Lab Mongolia, will be on the line to answer questions in place of Aryuna Narovsambu, who is currently based in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. As we turn to your questions, I'd like to dedicate this session to the memory of my dad, Anthony Udugama, whose birthday is today. Thanks to his influence, I have an unquenchable curiosity, an abiding love and interest in the world and its peoples. So one of the first questions from the audience, what kind of organizations can partner with Thriving Earth Exchange? And I'll go ahead and answer that since I am with Thriving Earth Exchange. We have now worked with scientific organizations and institutions, community-based organizations, and nonprofit organizations. And these are typically the types of organizations with the capacity and personnel to adapt community science. A question for the Public Lab Mongolia team. If folks want to volunteer to be part of a Mapathon, where geographically should they be based?
Thank you, Natasha. So for the Mapathon program, anyone with a computer and internet can contribute to the mapping efforts. It's all done on OpenStreetMap, and we have already existing tasks or mapping areas that are highlighted, and people could go and start mapping. Right now, we're focusing on basic infrastructure mapping because a lot of the rural areas are still missing from the map. So roads, buildings, fences, things like that could easily be mapped. Yeah.
Thank you, Tunga. Another question from our audience. Funders love the idea of scaling up solutions, but I've always found that, especially in more rural and remote areas, it's more important in terms of adoption and ownership of solutions. People often have more trust in people living near them than say from people from the capital. How can we more effectively encourage sharing that promotes sharing and scaling up, especially in places like Mongolia and Senegal? I know that you said Peru, but unfortunately it was a misprint in in our program. So I will turn that question over first to Doro and Tunga, and then I'll be happy to add in too. Doro? Okay, well, perhaps Tunga, you'd like to take a stab at it first?
Sure, thank you. Very good question. So we, have a lot to learn about adapting community science approach in Mongolia. And so our thinking as for now is to start small, start with a community that we have ties to or we have worked before, that we have relationship, because one of the most important aspect of community science, we believe, is having trust and solid relationship with the communities we're working with. So we want to start small, and then Mongolia, even though we have very few people in a very large land, the way that government organized the people is to spread them out across the country. So we have 21 provinces, and there are people living in each of them. And so the idea would be exactly as they said, rippling out. So, if we worked with one community and we have a good practice, then we would like to share with a neighboring community that would have to share a border or would have to share an issue or similar context.
Thank you so much, Tunga. Doro, would you like an opportunity to answer too, from the Senegalese context? Doro, you are muted if you are speaking. Please unmute yourself. Okay, hopefully we will be able to hear Doro momentarily. In the meantime, I'll go ahead and answer that question as well. I just really want to reiterate the fact that it is really important to find community champions, and this is something that I have discussed as well with the Public Lab Mongolia team in particular. And I just wanted to reiterate also that it's what Tunga's really great point about being trusted by the locals. It's important to find community champions, locals to those particular communities. So maybe even younger people who might be more interested in this idea of starting with communities first. And hopefully also people who are trusted by the locals to learn and help promote the fact that local communities have the knowledge and experience to work as equal partners with scientists. Doro, if you're able to speak and unmute yourself, please add your response as well. We'd love to hear from you. And Doro, you are still muted. Okay, well, in that case, maybe we will be able to hear from Doro momentarily, but we will move on to the next question that we just received from the audience. This person says that they think it's important to find, sorry, that is not the question. What have you found is the easiest or most natural part of launching a community science program? And what is the hardest and why? This seems like a question for our panelists. So Doro or Tunga, whoever would like to speak, please unmute yourself.
I can go ahead if he's still having trouble. Okay. Really great questions. So I would say the most natural part is people talking, around the table, because that's one of the, first things that a community science project does, is a launch workshop that Natasha had facilitated in Mongolia last year. And, we have invited people from a community in central Mongolia, a province called Arhangay. And there were, former governors, herders, what we call kind of like forest rangers, but for not just forests, but for the whole area, school teachers, so people we thought that have important roles to play in the local community. And, normally these people would not necessarily sit together and talk about community science. So one of the most natural thing I would say is, people coming together and just taking the time to talk about their community from maybe a little bit of different perspective, and listening to each other.
That's a great point, Tunga. Thank you so much. Indeed, it was one of the highlights of my trip, was being able to witness some of those conversations with the herders from Arhangay in Mongolia. Doro, are you able to unmute yourself? If you can also respond to that question about what is the most natural part of launching a community science program, and what is the hardest and why? You're still muted, Doro. Oh, that's too bad. Really want to hear from you. Okay, it seems like maybe Doro is having some technical difficulties on that end. We will then move on to another question.
I can actually add on to
Sure.
the last question, the hardest part. Well, I don't know if I would say it was the hardest part, but it was kind of a moment of, you know, people collectively shifting. Like there was a shift in their mindset, is when, you know, we said that community science is, it's not like, you know, a project, like a traditional project that's funded by donors, you know, from international donors or, you know, big aid. It's basically investment, like knowledge, you know, investment in knowledge and investment in skills, that, and then the communities will have to do the work themselves. And it took, you know, I could remember that few minutes. Actually, it was more than few minutes because people were discussing, you know, like, oh, what do you mean there's no money, you know? And this is, you know, what Ari was talking in her presentation earlier, is that you know, development has been done in such a way that it created this kind of mentality of, you know, dependency, and the word project is connotated with money, and now community science coming back, you know, to the idea of, you know, well, we're just pairing up with a scientist who could you know, help with things that you may not have, like a resource or knowledge or technical skills, and then we'll just work together. And so that was a real, you know, change in how people were thinking about the project and ideas. And it was actually quite liberating because, you know, no one was trying to get something out of somebody, or there was, you know, when you remove that kind of element, then, you know, people could be more free in a way to think about more creatively about their community issues.
Excellent. Thank you
Hello.
so much. Hello, Doro. Great.
Hello.
Are you able to?
Okay, thank you. I have some difficulty. Yes, some technical difficulty. Okay, I want to say previously we established our program within the association to go and carry it out at the community level. Sometimes there is a problem of appropriations and follow-up by the populations. We organize a lot of community service activity. But since we learned the concept of community science with Thriving Earth Exchange, we have radically changed our approach. We now place the community at the earth of our actions by identifying their priorities and by giving capital importance to the opinions and suggestions of the communities. This has allowed us to develop relationships of mutual trust between our association, AGS, and the local community. And then the communities feel involved and now ensured the follow-up of actions. We bring just the technical touch that allows us to better organize the idea put forward by the communities. This inclusive approach of community science has allowed us to be closer to the communities, and we strongly recommend that different associations, NGOs, etc.
Thank you, Doro. Thank you so much for that response. And it made me think a little bit as we're waiting for more questions to come through here. How have both you and Tunga in Public Lab Mongolia and AJGES, how have you maintained those community ties during a time of COVID when people are not able to go out Can you tell us a little bit of what has really worked well during this time?
Yes. Hello?
We can hear you.
Yes, since the beginning of COVID-19, our association, AGS, has adapted by organizing webinars, but also by organizing the distribution activities of masks and hygiene kits to help population to better protect themselves against corona. This solidarity is very important for the community. However, the COVID has disrupted the functioning of the AGS, and many activities in the field have been postponed. Thank you.
Tunga, do you have a response to that?
Yes, thank you. So like Ari said in her presentation, the community we're working on, the first community science project, we're starting to work on. We had plans this year, as with everyone, and there were delays. But is located about 600 kilometers away from the capital city. And so, frequent travel is difficult, and especially with travel restrictions and lockdowns, it's out of the question. And we're working with the rural community. So the communication is very important still. So we have phone calls mostly. We don't really email because I think first email is not, especially we're not really communicating with a specific institution, we're working with different community members. So we're calling them and just kind of catching up and, checking in how they're doing and talking about, how we might pivot our plans due to the pandemic. And just trying to have regular communication and assurance that we are still there and we are still committed to working together, and we have plans, and plans may change, but we are keeping them in a regular communication, and that's really all we can do for now. So that's what I would say.
Thank you both. This next question is for Doro. Doro, do you have some examples of current projects in community science that you and AJGES would like to prioritize?
Yes, we have some example about fight climate change in the north end of Senegal, because we have in this locality, in this area, we have collaborate with the local communities and how to reforest this area, because we have no trees and it's very hot in this area, and we have bringing some trees, and also community have given us his priority is to give that the trees, and also how to build with local materials, eco-construction, because they use the cement in this area, because the cement is hard to live in this kind of construction. And RGS was there with local community, how to reforest and how to build with local materials, like some of kind of what does mean that in English? Some kind of materials. I don't know what to say that in English, but it was very important for the community. And now the community are as every time reforest, and we bring up the trees every time. And I see that it is very important for us. And this is also the community service. And also, if we do something like that with the community can continue to do the same activity himself without as yet and without another organization. It is very important to help them to make something in these communities. I think that you know what I want to say.
Thank you so much, Doro. Yes, those are all really important issues. And I know that another issue that you all have brought up several times is this issue of mining, artisanal mining in several parts of Senegal. So that's another issue that AJGS has been working with several communities in Senegal on. So this next question, I think, is towards myself. It's why do scientists get involved in community science? So this was something that, 6 years ago when I started with Thriving Earth Exchange, I wasn't really sure whether we would get pro bono volunteer scientists coming to Thriving Earth Exchange and saying, yes, indeed, I do want to work with you on a 6 to 18-month project without being paid. But the motivations that I've heard from scientists is that they have always wanted to have a mechanism like this to be able to be connected to communities. And by AGU having the Thriving Earth Exchange, it has provided this opportunity to actually be connected to communities in ways in which other scientific societies in the past have not had that opportunity. Members of those scientific societies haven't had the opportunity to connect directly with communities. And another primary motivation is that they got into science because they wanted to give back to communities, and this gives them that opportunity. So that has been very heartening to me and my colleagues over the last few years, hearing this from our scientists. And now, as we are scaling up our program itself and developing our Community Science Fellows program and having young, early career, mid-career, and even retired and science interested public being very interested in learning the Thriving Earth Exchange community science approach and taking a community from inception to implementation is very heartening, and also seeing the uptake in scientists interested in volunteering on those projects as well. So another question that's come through is that they really like the emphasis that we've placed on trust. Thank you. What suggestions do we have to build trust when you don't share the same geography or culture? So I'll go ahead and start, and then I'd love to hear from our colleagues, Doro and Tunga. I think one of the things is just to be very open and be yourself. Try to take your scientific hat off for a moment and see each other, see your fellow human beings as simply human beings. I think that is something that's helped me personally sort of bridge the gap between various different cultures. And especially in a time of COVID, where a lot of us are, as a human family, we're going through very similar struggles. I think that's definitely one thing, is to find the commonalities that we all have as human beings, and to be able to just understand where we are as human beings, get to know each of your partners as people, and before you really talk about work necessarily. I think in the case of meeting Public Lab Mongolia, I think I was lucky enough to meet the team in person when they came to Washington, D.C. last year, and then subsequently going to Mongolia. in the case of Doro, he and his team were able to meet Raj, our director, and others last year at fall meeting, and they have been avid attendees of fall meeting, as well as being connected through our Centennial program last year. So we've been able to build some personal connections. In regards to our partners in Australia, we were connected to them through mutually, the Future Earth has hubs all over the world. So our Future Earth Colorado hub connected us to the Future Earth Australia hub. And with our partners in Peru, that has come about because of a personal connection through my colleague, Erin Gleason. And because of her work with the Mountain Institute, we've been able to connect with them. So I'd say really focus on just understanding each other as human beings and building, which is the best way to build a relationship. Tunga and Doro, what thoughts do you have about that question? Again, that's suggestions for ways to build trust when you don't share the same geography or culture.
I'll go first. I think, trust is something that takes time in any kind of relationship. So, that's one of the reasons we are starting to work with a community that we already have a connection with. Some of our team members, are from Arhangai, and we have worked in that area in the past. We have some knowledge of the area. We know some people there. And so it makes it a lot easier to go in or go and talk to people. And you're less likely to be questioned. Who are you? What are you trying to do? If you were to go to a community that you never interacted with. And once we establish this kind of the first introduction, so to say, then maintaining that relationship by communication and discussion and feedback, and and we've also, there's small things you can do in a practical way. For example, just providing them with base map of their area to community leaders who came to the workshop. They really appreciate it because then they could use it to have their own discussions. And that didn't really take a lot from us in terms of resources. And so if there are small ways that you can help them or support them, that also builds trust and kind of what's the word, to strengthen your willingness to work with them, then it helps a lot.
Thank you, Tunga. Doro, do you have any thoughts about how you have built trust with communities in Senegal when you're not necessarily in the same area? You might be you're based in Dakar, the capital of Senegal. How have you built trust with communities outside of Dakar?
Yes, I want to say that our association is a national association because our members are in the most of area in the Senegal. You have some people who come from the eastern of Senegal, some another person the southern, etc. etc. We have the representations in our association. People, if we want to do something in one localities, in one area in Senegal, in the associations, we have to discuss with the people who live in this area, because we have some people in this association who live some different area in this Senegal, and we have to discuss with them what is the matter, the problem of your area. What do you need in your area? And you have to discuss with us if you have agree with them, and we have to go to in this locality and to discuss with. We have no geographical borders. We have no culture borders. We have no religion borders also. Donc, we have some objective. We have our objective, how to help population. And I think that population is with these new innovations, they must from thriving of action to community science, we have give priorities from like the priorities of local community. I think that is very important for the community. Be an important actor if what we are doing there. Thank you.
Thank you, Doro. Those are really good points. Question for Public Lab Mongolia, Tunga. As a relatively new NGO, how will you connect and encourage more communities in Mongolia to work with you on community science projects? What initial ideas do you all have?
Thank you, Natasha. Yeah, again, we go back to starting small and starting with projects that are, realistic, and with communities that we know we can work well together. Because at the end, we want our first community science project to succeed, even if it may be on a smaller scale, so that the best practice can be shared proudly to the neighboring, communities. And also because we have a lot to learn, like Ari said in her talk, that we've took the course on adapting community science that Natasha and her colleagues put together. And, we also had a lot of discussion based on the course content, because every step we would think, well, would this work in Mongolia or not? And some things we say, well, that's not really, we don't see that really working. So what can we do instead? And, we don't have all the answers yet, but we will learn by doing. And so we want to focus on small, tangible projects that we can do with a community that we have a relationship with, and hopefully to share that experience that would kind of give a positive sense of, what this community science approach is to the other communities who may be interested.
Thank you, Tunga. Great response. There's a really good question that just come through, and I'm curious to hear from both you and Doro. What kinds of traditional or local community-based practices in Senegal and Mongolia could provide an entry point to doing community science? Who would like to start? Tunga, Doro, any thoughts about that?
Yes.
Please, Doro, go ahead.
Yes, in our country, we have the local associations, the local development associations, the young associations, the women associations. We are collaborate with them, and also we have collaborate with the local governments. Like the local leaders how to build something with them. And I think that is very important. And we have also some kind of local economic association who would like to develop their skills about something. I give some example. If you go to the eastern of Senegal, we have many people who doing the artisanal mining in this area, the artisanal mining. They need how to protect themselves to this activity, because they have many hazard in this activity, and population have some many difficulty to develop their activity, and we have to help them how to minimize these hazard and how to profit in artisanal mining, and how to protect themselves, how to their health. Their health is very important, and we are collaborating with local medical center how to steer these kind of activities. Yes.
Right. So it sounds like maybe AGU's GeoHealth section could be very useful in terms of finding the right types of expertise to work with those types of communities that are suffering health effects of mining. Tunga, do you have any thoughts about some of the traditional or local community-based practices that could be an entry point to doing community science? I know in the case of Mongolia, I remember you and the team saying, and this really stuck out to me, that the term community science is not easily translatable in Mongolian. So I'm just curious how you might respond to this particular question.
Yes, thank you. That's right. We don't know that we still have a good, concise, term for it. Still, we're working on it, trying different word combinations. Even the word itself, community, is very tricky to translate because, anyway. So as to the question of traditional practices, one of the things we were planning this year was actually focused around a summer festival we have in Mongolia called Nadam. And this is a festival, maybe some of you will know, that has, horse racing and archery, where actually a lot of women participate, and wrestling matches that only men participate. And in Arhangai, actually, they also have a very interesting yak festival as well. So there is, this great festivity in the summer, and it's also part of a, local and international tourist attraction. So one of the first community science project we were planning with the Arhangai community is improving the solid waste management and to promote and improve community-based tourism. And so we were going to, introduce community science. Well, not necessarily, oh, here is community science, but, look what we can do as a community. And, here is some science to, managing solid waste with the community involvement. And then the event itself, of course, will have a waste management component, which we could then highlight some of the initiatives. So that's one thing that came to my mind with this question.
Thank you so much, Tunga. I see we have about 3 minutes left in the session, so I think I will start to let our panelists and close out the session a little bit with just a thought about your experience adapting community science with Thriving Earth Exchange, and what you might recommend for those organizations that might be listening, or scientists who are part of organizations who might be interested in adapting community science, what recommendations might you have for them to adapt Thriving Earth Exchange's version of community science? Doro, would you like to start?
Yes, I think that we have some experience, in my little experience to community science. I think that is very useful for us, because now we know that if you want to do something with local populations, you have to discuss with them. You have to listen to populations. You have to know these priorities. And we recommend the association, the NGOs, to listen to population, and to, if you listen some population, you can know his priorities, and if you know the priorities of population, you can help them in this way. I think that it's important to do these innovative ideas like community science, and we have now to work with this way, and it's very useful for us. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Doro. Tunga, any last thoughts on
Yes,
that?
thank you. I'll be quick. So I just want to emphasize that community science is a very great way to make room for different, groups of people in the community, especially for women and girls. I want to say to foster their leadership in environmental and community issues that they live in, because it really, pairing the community with scientists, they kind of validates their knowledge in that way. And so, anyone in the community can feel that they are valuable members and they can contribute their knowledge of their local community. And just one last tip, I would say, for those who are looking to adopt community science approach in your own communities and contexts is, you're the ones who know your communities and your country and your context. So you have to think, whether something will work or not, and really be critical and open and with yourself about that. And because subtle differences can really make a big big impact on how effective this will be. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Those are really great points. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you all so much for joining us today. If you are interested in reaching out, please get in touch with myself or my team. We'd be happy to work with you and to figure out ways to collaborate. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.